Hi guys, Hengist here from House of Hengist Comics. Big welcome back to the channel and a quick channel update. Today I thought I'd first of all start by thanking everyone who's supporting us in this huge project that we're trying to do, and secondly obviously apologise that we haven't managed to get some more material up on YouTube. Just been running into sort of processing delays and things like that. I also wanted to take 5 minutes off, didn't get that as we don't. But very quickly, what's coming up today is I just want to briefly mention where we're going. Obviously in Blitzkrieg we continue on. We're going to be doing the para landings basically in Holland, finish that off. We've got Hanau to do, then obviously the biggest operation of all, the critical facet to Blitzkrieg, which is the Meuse operation, then the race to the coast and Dunkirk. But at the same point in time, I also wanted to sort of switch it up a bit and also look at what is going on in the rest of the world, notably on the African continent, because this is very important to understand that. And I think the whole point about wargaming is it's about context as well. And for us, we want to understand what is basically making all these gears connect or disconnect, as the case may be. I think the thing that I've found by doing this project is you start to see why people were doing what, and it's not as reductive and as simple as people make out. There are lots of political and geopolitical factors that are driving this war, most notably, and I think Tick says this very well, based on a lot of current research, that this is really the first big oil war in history. It's all about oil. I mean, since the British Navy abandons coal under Churchill and starts to move to oil, we start to look at what is going on in terms of nations and how they're building for mechanised warfare. And of course, it all comes down to oil. And this is very critical as we go through the war. So without further ado, what this video is going to entail is a number of things. The first thing is we're going to briefly look at a little bit of history surrounding Somaliland and the campaigns that are coming up, because this is contemporaneous. I've had to build an enormous Italian army, and this is just the desert army. Then I've got to do the land-based army to fight in Albania and Greece, because this is also going to take place. So you've got obviously France first, and then you've got all the peripheral actions, some of it which cross dates, other which is just immediately following. And this changes things, and also the warfare is completely different. We're going to go from, basically tanks to camels to armoured cars to all sorts of things, as well as always logistics, and that's going to be a massive factor. So after this little brief intro and my thanks once again, we're going to look at obviously British Somaliland, what I've been doing painting the Italians, and also a little brief look at some of the battle testing that we've been doing as well, to give that more of a feel of what is coming up. I really hope you enjoy what we're doing and continue to support us, and please don't forget to share us about. So until later, when I'll wish you a goodbye, it's goodbye at the moment from him. Cheers, bye-bye. Yes, it's Colonial Conflict coming up, and we're going to be looking, as I said, at Africa. And I think a key thing to this is how to wargame it and what are we going to learn by it. And again, while we're very happy with what we're doing with our own rules, non-prescriptive wargaming, that's the way to go, I say, lads. And ultimately, do freeze frame what's coming up so you can follow up and research this yourselves. The new Legions of Roma, that's what I'm going to be looking at. But the background history is this is all about Mussolini, his rise to power, and obviously the legacy of the colonial race or scramble for Africa. Key to this is obviously Abyssinia in 1935, and there's a lot behind this, why Mussolini does what he wants. But ultimately, we've got real problems for the Italians, and they invade Ethiopia and they conquer it most successfully. They even use poison gas, can you believe it? And then we've got Italy and of course Albania to deal with. But in Somaliland in 1940 in August, this is where we're going to start to see some real heavy duty action as well. The campaign is very swift. The Italians massively outnumber the British and its Indian support troops and local forces. But there are some interesting battles, and I want to show that what is going on in more detail. And then of course we're going to be coming to the North African shores, where we're going to be looking at Egypt. Okay, let's look at SANDBLITZ and what we're going to be trying to do in the African theatre, so to speak. Once again, I think one of the big issues that I find is trying to replicate what we're really trying to do, and to get the understanding and experience to be able to do it, you know, properly. It's not all about effectively just, you know, one-off gaming. We're very interested in the wargaming concept, the campaigns, and the history behind what is actually going on. So like most things, I really start with the research. I start looking and examining the details that we have available to us, predominantly through books and in the internet. And I start with the black and white photographs, trying to build up an understanding really of the theatre, the sets that I've got to sort of create, and what I'm looking to try and achieve by doing that. Ultimately, you know, when we're going into places like Ethiopia and things like that, there are going to be some real challenges, but I'm quite excited about what's coming up, and I hope you are too. You know, as I've always said, one of the things that really makes a game is if you've got the detail behind it. And so with this element of research, we've got to really start looking at the plates and what we're building, and try and represent it, I think, as authentically as we can. Key to that is understanding the nature of the units themselves, the type of equipment that they're carrying, the limitations they have in terms of whether they were prepared for war. Greatly argue they weren't. And of course they've got different uniforms for different theatres. We've also got the issues of native troops and how we're going to rate and use them, and how they're going to be used in combat. We have to look at also motorised elements such as the battlereport, and effectively the type of equipment that I have, the auto blinders, and I had to get some early stuff for this, once again through gaming models, and we'll talk about them later. But we've also got camo schemes, we've got captured equipment, and we've got all of those things to consider as well, and how we're going to use them, as well as getting the right colours. I tend to use Vallejo. An excellent read is the Italian Army. I do recommend that because it's got some great colour plates. And like my research, I'm also trying to examine, you know, the structure of the army. And there are lots of great YouTube videos. I recommend TIC, I recommend Military History Visualised, really helpful. Okay, so let's look at the building and the preparation. The first thing is, once I've done that research, I'm looking at where I can go and get stuff. The predominant figures that I used for this were Skytrex's range, which are the Italians. Excellent. There's also Peter Pig. But my go-to is gaming models in the USA. Absolutely fantastic little models for wargaming. I also get a lot of the material I want off the roadside, literally, or off the beach. So it's cheap, and just a pound of PVA and you're set to go. Then I'm using MDF bases. I basically set out according to the structure of what I'm building the units, and I'm looking then to apply filler. At this stage I'm also adding stowage. You can get that from PSC, that's really good, or other companies like Debris of War. I use Wilco's wood filler here, and you can see me there with the knife on, just applying that filler. Importantly, I try and cover the base. This is really important. And I use a little bit of water to clear it up afterwards, the same I do when I sprinkle the sand. As you can see, some of these are sanded already. Once I've got that structure in place, as you can see, and I've built the 3 platoons to the company that I'm looking to represent, and some of the support weapons, I'm also looking at you know, putting the vehicles together and trying to prep them as well. Lots of plastic art here. Then I've got the colour scheme to consider. Most of the early tanks were green, in fact. And here is some of the first company that I've managed to paint, which we'll see in a minute in action. Notice the sort of terrain that I'm trying to build up, and you'll see that from the photographs, a lot of this rocky, sandy material that's used across the desert. And this will be very useful in all the theatres I'm fighting in. So I think they look effective. Again, you know, it's about colour, it's about visualising what's going on in immersion. Okay, so let's get into the battle action then, or the battle tester. And again, photographs that have inspired me. I thought I'd do a sort of Bardia type-esque action. Notice all the rocks and the British infantry here. We're looking at the Australians today. They've got some armoured cars and some Matildas. And, you know, ultimately, this is not about points. It's about just trying to explore and understand the nature of the rules.
Moreover, this isn't a full-blown set, and we've shoved some camels in there just to see how they'll perform. So without further ado, let's get into the action, and we see the Italians are dug in around a small outpost near Bardia. What they've got is they're basically prepared for their sort of defence, so to speak, but there's not much wire around or anything along those lines. Although this was a very dug-in position, I just want to see how everything sort of worked. And as you can see from here, they are mainly dug in and prepared. And now we've got, 3 platoons, scouts, mortars, and some anti-air and anti-tank guns. Of course, the Australians have 3 platoons and 2 tanks in reserve. And what's going to happen is we're going to not do a night attack. We're going to just do a daylight frontal attack, and the Australians will begin by moving forward and basically advancing onto this position following a preliminary bombardment. In most attacks and assaults, there's always a preliminary bombardment, and so you need to reflect these in these sort of games with the disruption. Here's the Italian OP for the mortars on top of the hill. And the preliminary bombardment begins, and it inflicts not much damage, but it pins everywhere, and it effectively knocks out the AA battery straight away. The Australians move straight in, some staying low and moving forward, but the others coming straight into an assault by the Mussolini effigy and are repelled. At this point, reserves arrive all of a sudden in the form of camel infantry and race upon the Australians who are behind in the Muslim cemetery. What we've then got is basically the Italians trying to desperately unpin. They're all reluctant, conscript or trained, and the Australians keep putting the pressure on. And one of the great things about this game is that although they've been repelled once or twice and they start to take casualties, when they do eventually get in, we get high moments of drama and tension, notably led by what I've effectively called Corporal Bennett, who basically sustains as a single-man team. He's shot at, he effectively is to carry the day, and this is where we sort of get an understanding of the sort of gallantry, as the camels really basically get suddenly surprised by Matilda's machine gun. The Australians are really tenacious today. That fearless really makes a difference, and they actually charge the camel-borne infantry and repel them really dramatically, as Bennett launches himself out and blowing, he does everything this day, and it's fantastic in terms of what we're actually seeing. Even though the Australians have depleted those cavalry to break, and with the Italians, if one platoon breaks, it's going to force motivation on every other raw platoon within that company. And this ultimately is what happens, what we call the domino effect, because we're trying to replicate the poor preparedness of the Italians, and ultimately they are sort of driven in and driven out. So it went really, really well. I mean, their one IC was captured, much to the amusement of the Australians. But ultimately, when it comes down to this type of fighting, this is what's to be expected. The casualties were a little bit heavier, I think, than for the Australians. But when you look at a third in terms of recovery, killed, wounded and dead, it came out to about 22 dead Australians, unfortunately, who fell in this action. But again, the Italians suffered 50% casualties and really broke when the tanks came in. They've got nothing to deal with Matildas. This is the big shock effect that we'll see again and again, especially around Bardi when they're outnumbered. The Australians are outnumbered 5 to 6 to 1. And it's very interesting to see how the mechanism unfolded. Of course, this isn't, as I said, our best sets. These are just testing games, and I was delighted with it. I was the Italians and got a damn good hammering, and enjoyed every moment of it. And that's the whole point, is we've got something that really feels right, it looks right, it's working right, and that's critical to testing. We didn't use a full battle deck, we didn't use a lot of the facets of the rules, because we're just looking really and discussing the mechanics and whether these units are replicating what they should. So what can we say in Postscript about this little episode? Well, really, it shows that you can do a lot quickly, that you shouldn't be frightened to really go for very unusual and interesting, I think, campaigns, because you learn a great deal in the process. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the desert, alongside Blitzkrieg as that continues. So without further ado, I hope you'll stay tuned, stay safe, and obviously catch us later in Blitzkrieg. Bye for now.